Hello guys, and welcome to a new edition of React Today as part of the World's Way Out project initiative. Today we're going to speak a little bit about a lot of stuff, but especially what the World Health Organization is saying, why it's saying it, and in the meantime doctors are being castrated. Yeah, their opinions. Doctors are being impeded to cooperate with whatever their professional and Medicare experience is all about. The scientific part and methods that justify the doctors to be doctors and to serve the communities is being taken away in order to be replaced by private corporations' initiatives, which only benefits the corporations themselves. The healthcare systems, which is, of course, with a tendency to be privatized. Here in Canada, there in the UK, the initiative is to privatize no matter what, so that anybody, even if doesn't have the money, well, could enjoy, quote unquote, the benefits of privatization, because according to them, only privatization knows better, they know best, and to keep the social practice that healthcare should be free and supported by government is communism and is socialism of the 21st century, and it should be replaced by the power and hegemony, and of course the scientific proof of the World Health Organization, which is led, of course, by the Gates, the Melinda Foundation, Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, as they are the providers of much of the money. Particulars also, apart from Germany, the United States, and many other countries, even though the United States had broke with the World Health Organization during Trump. Now with Biden, it's back. So Biden is supporting the World Health Organization with some percentage of the American people's taxes. But what seems to be the problem today? The problem that we're going to talk about today is because privatization has proven in the last 40 years not to be the solution, despite capitalism, as one of the important, economically speaking, issues that we have to consider when it comes to create social justice and when it comes to create developing economies and developing countries in order to succeed and become developed countries, as is the United States, England, Europe, etc., which are not nowadays. After the crisis of the war in Ukraine, all that has been taken apart, and it's not the same for Europe. It's never been the same for the United States, despite everything that the mainstream media tells you. Today, we're going to speak a little bit about what's going on regarding the doctors and how the privatization of the World Health Organization is running fast, and the offensive, the World Economic Forum, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, are pushing universities, pensions, and everybody all around the world in order to side with the United States, Europe, in order to make us rich, like they are, the ones that are controlling the power. So they say that everybody's going to have an opportunity, so healthcare systems have to be privatized so that everybody will have an opportunity to receive the benefits of the healthcare system in the United States, in Canada, in England, Europe, you name it. So today we're going to speak about why I don't think that is true. Okay, guys, so the document was published by Dr. Matthew Evans Coco. Um, why am I insisting on this? Because you have heard it here before. It wasn't read for any of you before. Um, but here in this program, React Today, as part of the World Wide project, but everybody's talking about the World Health Organization, you heard it here first. Since December last year and before, I was denouncing what the World Health Organization should be doing uh, precisely on these matters, just because a year before, or a year and a half before, I talked about the illusion of scientific-based medicine, which was a program that I did for us, for the country, for the world, banned by YouTube. I hope this one's not going to be banned, because the truth is there for us to grab, even though it's very difficult nowadays because of the new ways of the oligarchies and plutocracies that are taking over the world and the institutions all over. You remember the Sunshine List. So let's get into it. Punished for doing the right thing, the battle for ethical medicine in Ontario, by Dr. Matthew Evans Cockle. I hope I pronounced that well. This is April 2023. The College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario continues to pursue disciplinary proceedings against 3 Ontario doctors for providing vaccine exemption letters, and making allegedly misleading quote-unquote statements questioning the health benefits of CPSO policy on COVID-19. Medical doctors speak out. The stakes are high for Doctors Crystal Lukiv, Patrick Phillips, and Mark Trosi. With their medical licenses indefinitely suspended, they are risking their right to practice medicine, their income, and their reputation as healthcare professionals in a struggle over both the right of patients to receive personal health care and advice from their physicians and the right of physicians to debate medical matters of public concern. For Dr. Mark Trosi, it all comes down to following the golden rule of doing no harm and the Hippocratic Oath to uphold the medical profession's ethical standards. The ethical practice of medicine is simply the non-negotiable means and end of being a real doctor. For Dr. Crystal Lukiv, the ethical and effective practice of medicine depends upon doctors' freedom to make independent clinical judgments based on the doctor's knowledge of both the relevant medical domain and the patient's unique needs. It is imperative that such judgments proceed from both expertise and cornerstone medical fundamentals, and that they be exercised free from any and all coercive external interference. According to Drs. Lukiv, Phillips, and Trosi, the COVID-19 related restrictions that the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario has imposed upon doctors in Ontario are not only unethical and contrary to best medical practice, but they are also unlawful. As Dr. Patrick Phillips has explained, none of the policies imposed by the CPSO have any formal legal, I quote, force of effect to lawfully prosecute physicians, unquote. According to the most recent amendment of the Medicine Act of 1991, legally binding regulations may only be made by the CPSO's council, and I quote, subject to the approval of the Lieutenant Governor in Council and with prior review by the Minister of Health, unquote. The CPSO, and I remember you guys, that is the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. According to the most recent amendment of the Medicine Act of 1991, legally binding regulations may only be made by the CPSO's Council, subject to the approval of the Lieutenant Governor in Council and with prior review by the Minister of Health, unquote. The CPSO's COVID-19 policies do not have the Lieutenant Governor's approval and were not reviewed by the Minister, and they do not, therefore, meet the criteria of legally binding regulations. The point might seem insignificant at first glance, but it is of major importance. CPSO overreach. Essentially, if the COVID-19 policies imposed by the CPSO have no legal binding power, then the CPSO has no grounds for launching investigations against Drs. Lukiv, Phillips, and Trosi, no grounds for disciplinary proceedings and charges against them, and no grounds for suspending their medical licenses. A recent hearing panel at the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario rejected a motion to dismiss the CPSO investigations and disciplinary proceedings against Drs. Lukiv, Phillips, and Trosi. This means that all 3 of these highly qualified and ethically conscientious doctors continue to have their licenses suspended. In spite of this disappointing outcome, the hearing panel did result in several significant victories for the trio of physicians. In fact, the CPSO conceded that its restrictions on speaking out against public health orders, on prescribing off-label life-saving treatments for COVID-19, and on writing exemptions for vaccines are only suggestions, and I quote, properly characterized as guidance documents, not binding rules, unquote. Now, clearly, there is tremendous irony in this concession. The hearing panel has essentially exonerated all three doctors by admitting that the CPSO's COVID-19 restrictions are recommendations that do not have the force of law and are not mandatory.
At the same time, the panel refused to dismiss the CPSO's disciplinary proceedings against Dr. Lukiv, Phillips, and Trosi, and their licenses to practice medicine remain suspended. As Dr. Patrick Phillips has explained, what he and his two colleagues are facing in the ongoing litigation with the CPSO should be of major concern to all Ontarians and to all Canadians. What is at issue is, firstly, the right of all Canadians to receive personalized medical advice, treatment, and care. Secondly, who determines the nature of that care? And thirdly, what advice and options medical doctors can express privately to patients and publicly to their communities. Doctors' expertise disregarded by depriving physicians of the freedom to treat and to communicate with patients in accordance with their medical experience and expertise and knowledge of their individual patients' needs. The CPSO effectively prohibits the basis for informed consent and compels patients to accept whatever advice is promoted by the CPSO in lieu of proper personalized care. The threat to Drs. Lukiv, Phillips, and Trosi's continued medical practice constitutes a real crisis in Canadian medicine that needs to be addressed immediately. The crux of the problem is that the college have been given virtually unlimited power to investigate, discipline, and delicense doctors. Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms states that everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice, unquote. We talked about the fundamental justice in chapters before, a couple of years ago. Fundamental justice is something that is so fundamental that some laws can be abrogated or dismissed if necessary. It's not as important as the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act is in case of national calamity, national disaster, etc. But in the case of fundamental justice, some issues have to be taken on account. In this case, he's breaking the Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that states that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person and the right not to be deprived thereof except in accordance with the principle of fundamental justice. You can check that on my YouTube channel a year and a half ago. This section of the Charter should protect Canadian citizens from both investigations that are unconstrained by fact-based allegations and from punishments being imposed before the allegations have been determined. Contrary to common sense, however, courts have ruled that Section 7 does not apply to investigations related to professional licenses. Alarmingly, this restriction of Section 7 rights and freedoms grants regulatory bodies like the CPSO unreasonably broad powers to investigate and to suspend medical practice licenses prior to a hearing. As Dr. Patrick Phillips writes, this means that the college, I quote, can charge anyone for absolutely anything and get away with it, unquote. The hearing panel at the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario chose to schedule a hearing of the allegations against Drs. Lukiv, Phillips, and Trosi, even after conceding that the CPSO's statements upon which the proceedings are based regarding speaking out against CPSO COVID-19 policies, prescribing off-label life-saving treatments for COVID-19, and providing individual vaccine exemptions were only ever suggestions and not binding rules. For a great many Canadians following these proceedings, it must surely appear self-evident that such suggestions should not be used as grounds for suspension, investigation, or punishment of any doctor. What the doctor is saying is hydroxychloroquine, but the doctor is saying I suggest you to get ivermectin. He's not saying it that as a mandatory issue. He's saying, hey, I suggest you to get this one in order to save and take care of the planets professionally. because he knows his patients and he knows the drugs. As the books I have mentioned before here and many other programs, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., now candidate for the presidency of the United States, has been very clear in his investigations. And if you read his book, you will find out why. He's talking about hundreds of doctors from all around the world that are supporting these signs, not just into those signs. We'll get there. So this is very important. The doctor has the right, unless the doctor is acting unlawfully or against the Hippocratic Oath, which is to cause no harm. We also analyze the cause no harm issues in one of my programs. I don't mind doing it again. Okay, I repeat. For a great many Canadians following these proceedings, it must surely appear self-evident that such suggestions should not be used as grounds for suspension, investigation, or punishment of any doctor. Questionable actions by CPSO. Indeed, it seems highly questionable whether the CPSO panel has acted in good faith during the hearing. To wit, the CPSO hearing panel refused even to address Drs. Lucky, Phillips, and Troczi's key submissions that the CPSO, and I quote, Registrar Dr. Nancy Whitmore did not have reasonable and probable ground to order their investigations and that the college failed to establish that they had violated that standard of practice, unquote. Quite frankly, to ignore these submissions has all the earmarks of hubristic folly, appearing contrary to the principles of fundamental justice and the spirit of law in Canada. Dr. Patrick Phillips has expressed the matter succinctly, and I quote, in a free and democratic society, citizens are protected from laws that are so broad you can't know if you're violating them beforehand, unquote. Discussions of legal proceedings rarely make for good reading. The plodding pace of legal arguments and the barrier posed by technical vocabulary inevitably get in the way of visceral understanding. That's why it's absolutely essential that, in closing, we return to the fundamental issues. Doctors Crystal Lukiv, Patrick Phillips, and Mark Troczi have lost their licenses, their careers are under threat, and their lives are being marred by the unpleasant necessity of enormously costly ongoing legal fees and battles. Needless deaths. This is the most important issue that was not prevented with all this bureaucracy and lies that we have been told, not only in Canada but all over the world. Needless deaths. The personal cost they are paying is no laughing matter, but that personal cost is not what's driving them and is not where the gravity of this situation lies. These doctors are fighting for the right to care for their patients in the best way they know how, as determined by their medical knowledge and the individual needs of each individual patient. In reminding us what is at stake with the COVID-19 related restrictions imposed upon doctors by the CPSO, Dr. Phillips pulls no punches. 2 dots. Countless patients have needlessly died from COVID while being denied early treatments with life-saving medications. Countless patients have been deprived of informed consent around the risks of vaccines. Countless patients were denied exceptions even though they had horrendous adverse events after the first dose. Countless patients have been forced to take genetic therapy against their will, and many of those patients have died or been maimed by that therapy. Dr. Phillips, for one, has had enough. In view of the terrible harms associated with the CPSO's unchecked power over medical care throughout the declared pandemic, he's calling for, and I quote, a complete of the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, unquote, and the subsequent creation of a new college, quote, one with leaders who respect their rule of law, unquote, and whose power is, I quote, limited to prosecutions of offenses that are in line with the Charter and protect the rights of all, unquote. I don't know what you think about this, but I totally agree with this 100%. What we're seeing here is an abuse of power. What we here seeing is the breaking of all and each of the articles of the Nuremberg Code. What we see here is nothing but corruption that goes down from the prime ministers and presidents of all around the world to the healthcare systems, to the doctors, to the universities. I made a program before speaking about, guys, um, the absence of scientific based decisions and curriculums for universities. It's all being bought off. And as I have mentioned 8 years ago, this year we have 8 years since this program began. The power of brute capital is corrupting everything and every institution, and the pandemic has reiterated, but not only that, has proven, in fact, how corrupted the system has become. You can just check out what the FBI is doing in the United States and how the whistleblowers are coming to shine on the Congress of the United States, if not the most corrupt Congress in the world, that passes laws and bylaws in foreign policy and domestic policy. Okay, that's another issue that we have to talk about. Let's get back to the Nuremberg Code and how the presidents and prime ministers, healthcare departments of all nations mainly, have corrupted their institutions so bad that now it's common practice to be corrupted and to be a doctor without boundaries regarding what is ethical and what is unethical. Like Dr. Mengele and those others, they are just acting freely against their own patients, and that is unacceptable. Okay, so what we're going to hear today now, it's something that has to do with experiences and learning after the First and the Second World War. During the First World War, you remember, it was said to be the war to end all wars. Well, it was not such a thing. Um, the United States abandoned the possibility and the practical and real possibility for America to become part of the was then after known as the United Nations. The United States just refused to be part of the League of Nations. The League of Nations after the First World War was nations that came together to create a league in order to avoid a Second World War and to really commit themselves for the First World War to be the war to end all wars. That was the promise. Of course, it was a lie. The United States, of course, didn't align with the nations, with the League of Nations, which was very disappointing for Hemingway and many other poets that I made a program about it. It's called 11-11-11. It's on Rumble and YouTube too. I hope you see it. It's just a brief note on what the Lost Generation is all about. When you see the guys in Vietnam, they were an average age of 19. There was even a song, no, 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 19, etc. In the First World War, they promised us, the country and the world, that that will be the end of all wars if American, Europeans take over. It didn't happen. So, in the Second World War, there was characteristics that determined the need not only for the Nuremberg trial and crimes against humanity committed in the Holocaust. It's not the only Holocaust. There's many Holocausts that we have to talk about. It's not just one Holocaust that only favors one country and one nation around the world. No, there's many other Holocausts that we need to talk about without being accused of being anti-Semite and all that crap. No, we'll get to that. The point is, the killing of so many young people left Europe in the First World War without fathers to engage in the reproduction cycles that can and of course are very important in order to commit an economy in any country. In order to develop themselves, they need people. And if you send all the people to war and they die in that war, by chemical weaponry, like it was the First World War, in which the British, including Bulldog, the most famous Prime Minister of England, um, made comments about how effective the chemical weapons were. So, to the point that in the Second World War it was forbidden in the regulations that started to appear as the laws of war and the commitment of the countries in order not to use weapons that will devastate the enemy, like a nuclear war nowadays. But in the First World War, it was the chemical weapons. But you can see, and there's registrations about Bulldog, Prime Minister of England. He was very pleased in using chemical weapons in the First World War because it annihilated the enemy, and that's not permitted nowadays. But the British, of course, again, are sending phosphorus weapons to Ukraine in order to be used against the Russian army, which is also forbidden. But Israel have used them against the Palestinians, and they used it more than once in 1982, etc. But they are not called to account. The same with the United States; they don't belong to the International Court of Justice or the International Crime Court, and so they don't have to answer. And that's why this world is so fucked up, because the powers that be are being dismantled right now by truth. And the truth is the worst enemy they can find. That's why Julian Assange is still in jail. Release Julian Assange immediately! All the lies that we see in the United States, in the American Congress, in the British Congress, we cannot tolerate this any longer as peoples. And what the pandemic showed us is that we are not in charge, but the politicians, the industry, the commerce, the TLCs, everything related to humanity is controlled by powerful and very few people. It's not a conspiracy theory. If you still think that, you're very, very... Okay, let's get back to why after the Second World War, then after the Nuremberg trials, let's say, many German officers were, of course, submitted to the courts in Nuremberg in order to be found guilty. We're talking about many officers. This has to happen also with America, with Israel, and every other country that in the UK, Europe, 27 countries, whose leadership doesn't represent the countries. If their leadership represented the countries, we have no problem with that. But the problem is they don't represent their countries. And the countries that are represented and supported by their committing crimes against humanity, they are all to be, of course, taken to court. Because if it's the people in the whole nation, in this case, and others, that go against other countries, decimate, kill, assassin, it doesn't matter whatever means necessary, reporters, journalists, anybody cannot talk about it. Worse than dictatorships, and they get away with it because United Nations serves for nothing. Because America says that they're okay and they have the right to defend themselves. Because it's okay to take the third part of Syria and take it over. Because it's okay to sanction Russia, but Syria, Israel has all to do with it. United States and of course Europe. And that is not only unacceptable, but criminal. And we're going to see why. If you consider that the crimes against the world are only Nazis, okay, you're very ignorant. I wonder what George Galloway had to say about it now that he's not answering my calls. I thought you were you were smarter than that. Now that I have proven you wrong, George, more than once. Is that what it is all about, George? That you don't like to be proven wrong? If I were proven to be wrong, I will accept it publicly. But apparently you don't want to do that. Apparently your ego is bigger than the United States Senate nowadays. even though I admire you and your programs are good. But why don't you receive my calls? According to the British Medical Journal number 7070, volume 313, page 1448 of 7 December 1996, the judgment by the War Crimes Tribunal at Nuremberg laid down 10 standards to which physicians must conform when carrying out experiments on human subjects in a new code that is now accepted worldwide. The judgment established a new standard of ethical medical behavior for the post-World War II human rights era. Amongst other requirements, this document enunciates the requirement of voluntary informed consent of the human subject. I repeat, this judgment established a new standard of ethical medical behavior for the post-World War II human rights era. Amongst other requirements, this document enunciates the requirement of voluntary informed consent of the human subject. The principle of voluntary informed projects the right of the individual to control his own body. Let me show you something here. Just a note for you to reflect on it.
Hello, my name is Julia Musa. I'm a second-year student at GISPIA. So my research will be looking at the Conservative Party of Canada and how they changed their political discourse at the time of the Freedom Convoy. So how we saw them speak differently about vaccines, about the pandemic and masking and other measures. So words are really important to me in terms of my research. I'll be looking at specific words. So today I want to ask you a question about the word misinformation. So the word misinformation or disinformation can be a loaded word, and it can also have multiple meanings. It became a popular word during the pandemic. It's used by both the right and the left. The concern is when this word is being used to discredit opposing views, which was amplified during the pandemic. It's been a word you've used many times, so how do you decide what's misinformation and when to use this word, since the word can encompass different ideas amongst Canadians? Thank you.
Unlike all of you in this room, or most of you in this room, I never studied political science. I studied English literature. So words really matter to me. And you may call me old-fashioned, but I tend to defer to the actual definitions of words when I use them. And misinformation and disinformation, which you used a little interchangeably, are actually very different things. Disinformation is when things that are false, things that are untrue, are spread by people who don't know any better. Misinformation is a deliberate choice to spread and share falsehoods for a particular purpose, whether it's a personal purpose or a political purpose or a creating chaos purpose. Now, what can start as misinformation can quickly end up being amplified as disinformation. But the entire discourse has to ground itself in something, because you're absolutely right. Who decides what is misinformation and disinformation? Well, if someone looks outside and says it's a beautiful blue sky sunny day today, we would know that's wrong, because our experience here in Ottawa, our experience looking out the window tells us otherwise. But if someone says the earth is flat, you can see extensive YouTube pages devoted by people who've decided, and this is a recent phenomenon over the past decade or so, that the earth is flat, because their experience as they look out to the horizon is, boy, the earth sure looks flat. So it can't just be about perception. You look on the Weather Channel, oh, it's raining in Ottawa. Okay, so it's not a blue sky sunny day. We have to agree that we're going to agree with the Weather Channel on this, or with the scientists from Environment Canada who are saying that it is sunny today in Ottawa, or it is rainy here today in Ottawa. There has to be an acceptance that there are experts out there that create a basis of fact that was built up on in generations to tell us that, water is wet and it freezes at 0 degrees Celsius, and there are scientific realities that have been proven and accepted. And the challenge that we have now is that increasingly misinformation and disinformation is carrying people to believe things that are untrue. And vaccinations is a perfect example of it. Like any modern bit of medical advancements, there are potential side effects in vaccinations. And there are people who've probably gotten very sick from vaccinations, on the billions of people who've been vaccinated against COVID over the past few years. But there are far more people who obviously have died. Due to COVID, died from not getting vaccinated. And the idea that people can fly in the face of science, well, individuals are allowed to make their own choices. There may be all sorts of different reasons why someone is hesitant to get vaccinated. But I make a distinction, and I always have, between someone choosing for personal reasons to choose not to get vaccinated and someone deliberately using misinformation to mislead and scare other people with so-called facts that aren't facts at all, that lead them to make a choice that endangers their lives and the lives of other citizens. So as Prime Minister, through the greatest public health crisis that we've faced in 100 years in this country, since the Spanish flu, my responsibility was to keep as many Canadians alive as possible. And all of the scientists and the medical experts and the researchers, not just in Canada, but around the world, understood that vaccination was going to be the way through this. And therefore, while not forcing anyone.
Okay, Senator Cassidy.
I defer to Senator Polk. Mr. Mansell, Moderna recently paid NIH $400 million. Do you believe it creates a conflict of interest for the government employees who are making money now off of the vaccine to also be dictating the policy about how many times we have to take the vaccine?
Good morning, Senator. Indeed, we recently made, before Christmas last year, a $400 million payment to the NIH for an old patent that they had developed, not related to COVID, but useful in the development of a COVID vaccine to pay them for their work. It's for the U.S. government to assess how that money should be used.
Do you think it creates a conflict of interest for the same people deciding the policy of how often we have to take the vaccine to also be making money the more times we take the vaccine? Yes or no?
This is for the government to decide, Senator.
You have no opinion on whether or not it creates a conflict of interest. Is there a
to get vaccinated, I chose to make sure that all the incentives and all the protections were there to encourage Canadians to get vaccinated. And that's exactly what they did. We got vaccinated to a higher level than just about any other of our peer countries. And that's why we had a less deadly pandemic than most other countries. Now, I see a lot of people nodding along with that. But boy, oh boy, you know, the comments section on the live stream right now is exploding with people who are in deep, deep disagreement with everything I just said. And we have to figure out how to continue to protect those people, because my job as Prime Minister is to keep people alive and keep people safe and keep democracy going, whether or not they choose to believe that's what I'm doing or not. But this is a challenge that we've all faced throughout our democracies, and I know you guys had similar discourses in Germany around that.
This code also recognizes that the risk must be weighed against the expected benefit and that unnecessary pain and suffering must be avoided. Anyway, we have second, third, fourth side effects, myocarditis, etc. To what point that was not taken on account? I think there's plenty of information about it. The principles established by this code for medical practice now have been extended into general codes of medical ethics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Paul. On September 12th and November 7th of last year, I sent letters to the State Department asking for records about coronavirus research that had been funded by the State Department. The State Department refused to comply. When Assistant Secretary Sherman came, I asked her the same question. She didn't seem to be aware that you had been funding coronavirus research, but you are. And I got the "I'll get back to you" line. A couple weeks later, I met personally with you at the State Department and asked you the same question. Will you not divulge to us the records of the State Department's support for coronavirus research, particularly in China? You assured me you would help. We communicated several times over the phone with another Assistant Secretary of State who finally sent us a letter and said, no, we're not going to give you anything. So that's where we stand. And it's my question is, what's the State Department hiding? Why won't you give these records to the American people?
Senator, thank you. And yes, I appreciated you raising this when we saw each other a month or so ago. And my understanding is that our teams have been working to find an accommodation. There's long-standing practice.
We got a refusal, blanket refusal. No, they are not going to give us the records.
We cannot directly provide the
Sure you can.
unredacted cables. We have a long-standing practice with this committee about how we do.
You're refusing to release them.
No, but
not that you can't. There's a difference between can and may. You won't do it, but you can do it.
My hope is that we can find a way forward that answers your concerns so that you get the information that you're looking for. My understanding is that our teams have been working on that, and I commit to continue to do that so we can get you the
We're talking about unclassified material. Most of this is unclassified. And so we just had a unanimous vote in the Senate and in the House, and President Biden just signed a bill saying he's going to declassify stuff. But if you declassify it and you still hide it from the American people, that's a problem. I mean, we spend all of this time lambasting authoritarians, and for lack of transparency, we have these silly networks on TV that are aligned with the Democrat Party saying democracy's under attack. Well, do you think transparency has something to do with democracy? You're refusing to give records on research, money that went for research. We want to read the research grant proposals. We want to read what the people in Wuhan sent back to the State Department saying they did. Which viruses did they create? Because the thing is it sounds all great. We're going to identify all the viruses of the world. But part of what they do is they take a virus they found 200 feet down in a cave, and they mix it with another virus to create a virus that doesn't exist in nature, because they say that's how we're going to further identify it. There's a big debate that should be had whether that's safe. To take a virus from 100 feet down a bat cave 12 hours south of Wuhan and take it to a city of 10 million. and yet you won't help us investigate this. You refuse, and it is reminiscent of the countries we criticize for lack of transparency, and yet you sit there and say you're still going to continue to reviews.
Senator, I think there are very important debates that certainly go beyond my knowledge and expertise. For example, on gain of function, that I know there's a vigorous debate about whether the risk outweighs the reward. I don't have the expertise to know that.
But how do we have oversight or investigate it if you won't give us a record?
So the program that, in this instance, USAID was involved in was not engaged in gain of function work or gain
That's
of function.
a debate,
But,
and that's your opinion. We'd like to see the records.
so,
Fauci says there was no gain of function in Wuhan, and nobody believes him anymore.
you know, again, there's I think, an important debate about this. As I recall, during the Obama administration, there's actually a moratorium put on.
I know, but it isn't
work.
the debate. I don't
That
want to have that debate with you. I only want to have the
Again,
record.
I believe that we can find a way to get you the information that you're looking for.
All right, but the last response we have from you is no. So the American public needs to know. I've asked many, many times. I've asked you in person. This is a second time in person. I've talked to 2 assistant secretaries of state, and the writing we get back from you is no. Not maybe, not we'll work with you, it's no. So that's
Senator,
where we are now.
No, and it's not no, just to be clear. We did reach back out to your team just as recently as this week to offer to provide all of that information in briefing form, which is to say...
Which means you get to read it and interpret it and spin it, and we get to hear your spin. We don't want to hear your spin. We want to look at the doc. We're talking about grant. We're talking about grant proposals. You act as if we're talking about the secrets of the Manhattan Project. We're talking about grant proposals, and we're talking about grant updates where someone has to write in and say, "Oh, we did this experiment, we got this result." That's what we're talking about. Same thing from NIH, same thing from HHS. Everybody's hiding it. And it's not even really something to protect the Biden administration. Most of this stuff happened in the previous administration. But I don't get it. Why circle the wagons? Maybe there's nothing to see here, but then it makes the whole world think you're hiding something if you won't give it to us.
Yeah,
so just give it to us. It's a bunch of bureaucratic paper that we're looking to sift through to see if there are any clues, because one of the biggest clues we have that they did this is they asked DARPA, and we only know this through a whistleblower, they asked DARPA for money to take a coronavirus and put a furin cleavage site in it to make it more infectious. And lo and behold, that's what COVID-19 is. It looks just like what they said they wanted to create with our money. And we turned them down, but that doesn't mean they didn't do the research. We're looking for research like that they were performing. We're looking for something that may be in their notes that hasn't been public, that hasn't been sifted through. But what we feel is that people at State Department and at NIH and HHS are conflicted. Why? Because if you funded research that somehow is linked to the pandemic or a leakage of that, that doesn't look so good for the people who funded it. So we see this as a circling of the wagons and a conflict of interest that maybe there are people within the State Department who funded research who are worried that it might be linked to the pandemic. But we can't just accept your spin on it because people there may be self-interested, the people who funded the program. We're just asking to look at the data, but so far it has been no. We've had a few phone calls, but we don't want your spin on it. We want to look at the documents ourselves.
We're not providing spin. As I said, I believe we can provide the information you're looking for. We have long-standing practices and procedures in terms of actually providing documents and cables with this committee that we're not prepared to change. But in terms of getting you the information you're looking for.
And the only cables we have that are of value, we got leaked to us, or actually they were declassified by the Trump administration. Those cables said, and these were from some State Department folks, and it was amazing, and I don't actually fault anybody for missing it. I'm sure there are thousands of cables, but in 2018 or 17, they were sending cables back saying, holy you-know-what, they're over here working without gloves in unsafe conditions in a BSL-2 that should be a BSL-4, not a very safe condition, and that's why some of our intelligence people have leaned towards this coming from a lab. Why wouldn't you want to help us? Why wouldn't everybody want to help us?
I've seen those cables. You're right, they've come out, and I think what they said, at least as I read them, was that there were concerns based on State Department officials
but we only know those because someone had the gumption to declassify them. And I'll end with this because I know my time's up. Mr. Chairman, it takes one signature He'll give all this stuff to me tomorrow if you'll sign a document, because he says he won't sign it unless the chairman of a committee does it, and he's hiding behind some ruse. There is no law saying this. He could do it if he wants, but he's hiding behind some opinion that his own administration makes the rules to say they won't give it to Congress. But if you'll help me, we can get the information tomorrow. Everything he's saying won't give me, he will give me tomorrow if you'll sign a letter.
I appreciate, the senator's time has expired, but I appreciate your concern. I understand that my committee counsel has spoke to your counsel this past Monday, and your counsel followed up with us today, and we are in pursuit of trying to see how you can be accommodated, and I look forward to making that happen. Senator.
The Nuremberg Code of 1947. It's not me saying it, I'm not making this up. Permissible medical experiments. The great weight of the evidence before us to effect that certain types of medical experiments on human beings, when kept within reasonably well-defined bounds, conform to the ethics of the medical profession generally. The protagonists of the practice of human experimentation justify their views on the basis that such experiments yield results for the good of society that are unprocurable by other methods of or means of study. All agree, however, that certain basic principles must be observed in order to satisfy moral, ethical, and legal concepts. As follows. Firstly, the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved as to enable him to make an understanding and enlightened decision. This latter experiment requires that before the acceptance of an affirmative decision by the experimental subject, there should be made known to him the nature, the duration, and the purpose of the experiment, the method and means by which it is to be conducted, and all inconveniences and hazards responsibly to be expected, and the effects upon his health or person which may possibly come from this or his participation in the experiment. Just with this first chapter, with this first article, prime ministers, presidents should be accountable. I'm talking about hospitals, deans of medicine hospitals, in virology, epidemiology, healthcare systems, just because of this first article, should be accountable, and they are, in fact, accountable according to international law and the Nuremberg Code, because you have to understand that this was accepted by the major or most of the countries around the world. And it's also, these principles established by this code for medical practice now have been extended into general codes of medical ethics. Apparently Canada, the UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Central and South America didn't care about this. Okay. The duty and responsibility for ascertaining the quality of the consent rests upon each individual who initiates, directs, or engages in the experiment. It is a personal duty and responsibility which may not be delegated to another with impunity. Healthcare systems, doctors that said, no, get the vaccine, get the jabs. Remember Prime Minister Johnson, there in the UK. Job, 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 we got the jobs. And they're still insisting on getting the jobs and get vaccinated by a vaccine that is experimental, that have not been tested efficiently in humans, and by the World Health Organization. Secondly, the experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary in nature. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary in nature. They were random, unnecessary in nature, and there was no fruitful results whatsoever. Thirdly, the experiment should be so designed and based on the result of animal experimentation and a knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study that the anticipated results justify the performance of the experiment. They came from bats. That's for sure. We didn't have consensus, but no, somebody said it, so yeah, let's reproduce the news. The media. Complicity on this. How many doctors said, yeah, sure, we don't know. What are you talking about? The experiment should be so designed and based on the result of animal experimentation and the knowledge of the natural history of the disease or other problem under study that the anticipated results justify the performance of the experiment. Even if you do it in China, America, England, you should know that this experiment should be performed in animals first before you put it onto mankind. No, they just said it came from animals. Everybody has it now. We don't have proof of that, according to the third article. We don't. Fourthly, the experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. Okay, according to the fourth article, which is very important, we got locked up. We cannot go out. If you don't get vaccinated, you lose your job. You're going to be paramount of a disease. Even Noam Chomsky, considered one of the most important intellectuals of the 20th century, and I was one of them. I used to consider him one of them. One of the most important intellectuals of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st. And I love him. I still do, and I still share his beliefs when it comes to many of the issues that he talked about. But when he came to the pandemic, he accused us unvaccinated of being criminals, and that we should be taken out of society. That's exactly what Prime Minister of Canada did. And especially when the truckers began the march that, thanks God, was an example of what the world have to do in order to confront the beast that has become corruption nowadays. The experiment, this is fourthly, the fourth article. The experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. I don't think there's a comparison in any other of the vaccination programs. Henrietta Lacks and herself. These people that suffer from many diseases that were taken care of. This didn't happen on the pandemic case. Okay, listen to this one. Fifthly, no experiment should be conducted where there is a priori reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects. I don't think that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau got the vaccine. I don't think that all those presidents, when this became normalized, got Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca vaccines whatsoever. We cannot prove it. I don't know, unless they give some blood and some experiments are taken on them in order to find out if they're lying or saying the truth. I don't think, but they got some water. No experiment should be conducted where there is a priori reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, except perhaps in those experiments where the experimental physicians also serve as subjects. I don't think that Dr. Anthony Fauci used the vaccine whatsoever. Sixthly, the degree of risk to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. By far exceeded the risks to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. What they told us that this was a humanitarian issue. As always, for war, for everything, there's humanitarian reason. Democracy reason. Well, there was not a humanitarian reason. It was, how can you have a humanitarian reason when there's a pandemic that for which we don't have a vaccine, and for a pandemic that have not been proven with consensus of all doctors around the world to say, hey, this is a pandemic, we have solutions for it. It never happened. It's explained by Dr. I don't know how many, 400 doctors, 300 doctors, depends on the books you read. For example, I'm going to give you a reference. Yes, the next president of the United States, if he doesn't get assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The degree of risk to be taken should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by the experiment. Far right, it exceeded it. More than 7 million people died on this experiment. And you criticize Mengele?
Welcome back to the channel. Rochelle Walensky, the CDC director, is becoming quite the politician. By that I mean, she's becoming good at lying. She lied to Congress a couple times yesterday. I want to walk you through those, but I want to talk more broadly about her failures of evidence generation, etc., etc. Rochelle Walensky is just, frankly, not a good CDC director. She trivializes harms of vaccines. She has a one-size-fits-all mentality when it comes to vaccine recommendations, but except for the new one, where of course now we can focus on 65 and up, so people seem to forget the argument, which was we couldn't have had tailored guidance for 65 and up because people will be too confused by that guidance, and now they're going to go ahead and issue such guidance showing that the American people are smart enough to know how old they are. It was always ridiculous to have a one-size-fits-all policy. That was on her watch. It was always ridiculous to not take myocarditis seriously in young men. That was on her watch. It was beyond ridiculous to continually push a series of retrospective garbage papers in MMWR and cite that prominently on long COVID, on risks of to the unvaccinated who have had COVID, on children, etc., etc. They did nothing but that. They put the worst quality evidence out there to support their bizarre masking strategy, which is, I think, still in effect. I think they would have you have toddlers still masking for the next 100 years. They've done just a bad job. And the root failure, what is the root failure? I think the root failure is it's somebody who wants to be well-liked and does well in bureaucracies that has this position, and she's also somebody who doesn't really understand evidence-based medicine. That's her root failure. She doesn't understand evidence, she doesn't get evidence, and she'd rather lie to preserve her face than to confront the fact that she has made mistakes and that they could have done a better job.
Seventhly, proper preparations should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death.
To debate this topic. I've been calling for this debate for some months, and I thank the 156,000 electors who've voted for us to have this debate today. And the pandemic treaty must be viewed in coordination with the changes, proposed amendments to the international health regulations. As George Santanea said, that those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them, and I do have some severe worries that the lessons of the last pandemic have not been learnt by the WHO themselves, and we are in danger of giving them more powers to enable them to overreach themselves and repeat those same catastrophic mistakes again. I would like to start by talking about the WHO itself. As my honourable friend for Don Valley pointed out, it was founded in 1948, a specialised agency of the United Nations responsible for international public health. It consists of 192 member states, basically the whole of the UN membership, excluding Liechtenstein and the Holy See. And it was based originally on a WH constitution, which is still today, but this constitution will be fundamentally changed by the two instruments that are in the pipeline following the COVID-19 pandemic. The WHO is domiciled in Geneva, and so it has special status. Its employees are exempt from tax, and they and their families all have diplomatic immunity. It is indeed a supranational body, unelected and unaccountable. I think my constituents would fear that. How is the WHO set up? Well, it has something called the World Health Assembly. It meets yearly in Geneva. It's a legislative and supreme decision-making body of the WHO. It elects the Secretary General, the Executive Board, and votes on policy and of the WHO. And the current chairperson of the World Health Assembly, of the WHO, is a gentleman by the name of Harsh Vardhan. In 2021, Mr. Sharma, the Indian Medical Association, the Indian version of the BMJ, the largest association of doctors in India, issued a statement when he objected to Vardhan, who was endorsing Coronil, a product that was being made in India. The IMA, the Indian Medical Association, questioned the ethics of a health minister, Mr. Vardhan, the health minister at the time, of that country, to release a fabricated and unscientific product onto the people of India. He's since gone on to become chairperson of the WHO, who are going to be presiding over this new treaty that's going to be sitting before every government in the world. Given that he resigned from the cabinet in India over this controversy, why has he ever been trusted with greater responsibility? It seems he's failed upwards, like many at the WHO and the WHA. So, the original ideals of the WHO were completely laudable. The WHO is to serve the health of the people. It's governed by its member states who will implement health policy in the interest of our people. State sovereignty and the rule of law will be respected. That's under Article 3 of the International Health Regulations, before they're amended. People's self-determination will be fully respected. All human rights, conventions and other acts will be respected that countries have joined up to. That was protected under Article 54 of the original regulations of human rights. But who's now funding the WHO? Like many of our regulators in the UK, the MHRA, 86% funded by industry sources. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, in their personal declarations, they declared over £1 billion of interests in Big Pharma, the thing they were set out to regulate. This undermines public confidence. Well, the WHO now is no longer anything like majority funded by its member states, the people who it is seeking to control. It's 86% funded by external sources. I'm not sure that my honourable friend for Winchester is correct. The UK is not the third largest donor. The second largest donor, it's the third largest donor. The second largest donor after Germany is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I think Gavi is the fifth. So you add those together, they are the biggest donors to the WHO. And you have to think, why are they doing this? They're also the biggest donors or biggest investors in pharmaceuticals and the experimental mRNA technology, which proved so profitable for those who proposed it and produced it during the last pandemic. Indeed, the WHO, it says the member states' contributions to WHO funds have been capped and today account for only 16% of WHO's total budget, with an increasing share of funding to WHO coming from voluntary contributions, where donors direct funding according to their priorities. Well, their priorities might not well be the priorities of my constituents in North West Leicestershire or the electorate in the UK, but he who pays the piper calls the tune. The WHO are promoting the influence of private-public partnerships. They promote that on their websites to the point where it's pay to play. Anyone can buy influence at the WHO. It's just going to cost you money. And when it comes to when they're consulting, their own internal report, their survey evaluation, final report, May 23, 23rd of May 2022, the various interest groups have more input to the WHO policy than the member states. It said under the WHO's own figures, the member states' only participation was 40% of the input, whereas 60% came from non-member states and 276 stakeholders. So it's clear there's a strong external influence on the policy of the WHO, an entity which, if the amendments to the International Health Regulations and the Pandemic Treaty were to be passed, and doing nothing is not an option. If this House does nothing and does not vote, they will come to pass by May 24. So doing nothing is not an option. It isn't going to go away. So the WHO's intermediate study says the WHO is an international organisation created as a sub-agency of the United Nations for the objective of obtaining the highest possible level of health for all people. But at what cost? At what cost? What cost to democracy? What cost to individual freedoms? It is now 80% funded by non-member states, and it is heavily influenced. And it also, during the pandemic, it took extra powers called the fact that it could define information. It took on a position, and this will be enacted in law and binding in those two new instruments, that the WHO has the ability to say what is disinformation. And when anybody says to you that the science is settled on any issue, I suggest that this House would smell a rat straight away, because science is never settled. There is always open for modification, for new things to be discovered, theses to be refined, and what the WHO is saying is that the WHO will be the arbiter of what the science is, and that cannot be right. It's a bit like someone saying the market's changed. Well, in my experience, it never has. So that is a huge grab of power, and the two instruments, the Pandemic Treaty and the amendments to the International Health Regulations, are progressing in parallel. And for those who, I just really worry whether colleagues in this have actually read the treaty, because clearly, when you take out the words "not binding" as an amendment, it then becomes binding. These are binding treaties. If we do nothing, these treaties are binding. They're legally binding across all the nations. They're bringing in an idea called One Health. And this then extends the ability of the Director General of the WHO to call a public health emergency of international concern, which incidentally is abbreviated to FAKE. FAKE. So, and it says that he can bring it in on the suspicion, the risk of an international incident. It doesn't even have to be about a pathogen that's affecting humans. It can affect animals. He's taking the powers because of the environment, or an increase in the levels of CO2. I suggest that honourable and right honourable members read the treaty. It is a massive extension of powers. And at the drop of a hat, one man, Mr. Tedros, can call for massive powers to the WHO. And not only will he call when he takes the powers, he will decide when the pandemic or the emergency is over, and when he will possibly give us the powers back to this House, where elected representatives are supposed to be representing the interests of our constituents. Well, that will all be suspended. And I would, while we're talking about Mr. Tedros, I would just remind the House that this gentleman who will be deciding the fate of the world, it will be within his gift to call these emergencies. The conduct of the WHO in the recent Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where 83 individuals who are working for the WHO sexually abused local women, and including the sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl, and it was all covered up, Mr. Sharma, and in a leaked document from the WHO, which would have been in front of Mr. Tedros's committee, a confidential UN report submitted to the WHO last month concluded that the manager's handling of the case didn't violate WHO sexual exploitation policies because the woman concerned was not a beneficiary of WHO aid since she didn't receive any humanitarian support. That is completely unacceptable. If that's the rules of an organisation, they'll be deciding whether my constituents are locked down for 6 months, 3 months, and whether they can go and see their granny. I don't think it's acceptable. Also, these new treaties, they compress the time for governments of mandatory reporting lines of 72 hours from when a risk to public health has to be reported to the WHO, and he'll make a decision. This is far too little time for any research, any meaningful research to be done as to what the real risk is, and it will lead to lots of potential for false alarms and unnecessary disruption. These are huge powers that these two instruments would seek to take away from this Parliament and every other Parliament around the world, and they need to be considered very, very strongly. Sticking your head in the sand isn't going to do. It won't do for my constituents. If we learn anything from the vote we had in 2016 is that people in this country, they do not want to be ruled by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. And there's no one more unaccountable and unelected of people in the WHO who don't pay tax, and they and their families have immunity from prosecution because they've got diplomatic immunity. They're also under the huge financial interests of whoever wishes to fund them. So many experts are now saying that these two instruments would fundamentally reset the relationship between citizens and sovereign states, not in this country, but also around the whole world. Unelected, unaccountable, top-down, supranational body, the WHO. What these treaties will do will empower that Director General to impose sweeping, legally binding, they are legally binding directions on member states. They have the power then to force companies in this country, or any other country, to manufacture certain medical treatments and to export them to other countries and be told to do it. You'll have the power to shut down any business in this country regardless of what the local people think or even this Parliament thinks. It takes away all the protections that being in a democracy offers. It actually takes away Article 3 in the original Constitution, which is the respect of human right and dignity. That goes and is replaced by a bland statement saying that there will be equity. And equity means whatever it means. It means that everyone's going to be treated equally. It also means that one solution to any international problem around the world. And that leads to an all or nothing situation, Mr. Sharma, where if the WHO got it right, and if we want to go in, if I have the time, I'll go into everything they got wrong in the last pandemic. If they get it right, okay, maybe okay. But if they get it wrong, that's the whole of humanity has got it wrong. There's no competition, and if there was only one car manufacturer, only one solution, I'm not sure it would be the best car that we could ever have. I think competition between nations for solutions is a good thing. I have grave concerns over these two instruments. And we have grave concerns. I have grave concerns to consider who's actually running and controlling the WHO organisation. It'd be foolish not to see that big pharmaceutical giants with their lobbying power, they have huge influence over the direction of the WHO, and like many multinational corporations, their size and scale supersedes even national governments. With over 80% of the WHO three-year budget now specified funding, and they have the ability to direct policy. I think it's fair to say we're drifting away from the WHO's original noble ethos of promoting democratic, holistic approach, cooperation to public health. The WHO let us down over COVID with their response. In January 2020, as already been pointed out, they were still telling us that there wasn't person-to-person transmission of the virus. That was wrong. That was wrong. And then they prescribed lockdowns and mass vaccination during a pandemic which drove mutations. The pandemic response by the WHO and the national governments should be a cautionary tale on the impact on citizens of handing power to the state, and should certainly not be a template for going further and faster in terms of signing away rights and liberties. Indeed, the pandemic response was so brutally illustrated. The profit-optimised version of the greater good pursued by the WHO often clashes with children's health. Before I spoke out on the 13th of December with regard to the risks of the experimental mRNA vaccines, the MHRA were looking to authorise the vaccination of children down to the age of 6 months in this country. I'm very grateful that the government listened, and we didn't do that. Indeed, it was then pushed back to people over 50, and after my speech on the 17th of March, I'm delighted that the government now has put it back to only those over 75. That's in a few months. That's a huge difference from we're going to vaccinate everybody, and I think that tells the tale of, if we were all under one rule, we'd be doing exactly the opposite of what this country has individually decided to do. So while we're on the subject of opaque, undemocratic organisations, it's interesting to see what the EU are doing. Well, the EU are actually they think that we need to strengthen all this, and they're going to set up, not only will the WHO be allowed to have a department of misinformation, they'll be the arbiters of whatever the truth is during an emergency. The EU are going to take over exactly the same policy, and they're going to have their own as well. So when we have a pandemic situation, there will be only one version of the truth. Well, that's not very good for science, is it? The One Health approach, it's also a whole society approach. They will have the ability to mobilise every aspect of our society. Once they call those emergencies, they're going to be able to keep them going. They have control of absolutely every aspect of our citizens' life. This is absolutely massive. There's no more important treaty. Of course, if we were to give these sort of powers, which I would never vote for myself, of course we should have a referendum, because sovereignty belongs to the people. It's not ours to give away, and we know that from the referendum we had in 2016. I hope the House listens very carefully and reads these documents. Ashton McBeth.
I repeat, seventhly, proper preparations should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. Never took place. What they did was to close the hospitals, make a big spectacle about the pandemic, put oxygen masks and everything around them, bubbles around the people, make a theater all around it, close exceptional diseases like cancer, people on terminal diseases. They were always closed because of the pandemic. Proper preparations should be made and adequate facilities provided to protect the experimental subject against even remote possibilities of injury, disability, or death. Eighthly, the experiment should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons. The highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages of the experiment of those who conduct or engage in the experiment. That never happened. What happened was the contrary. I am science, said Dr. Fauci. They're not criticizing me, they're criticizing science. A corrupt person like this, the governments, the people that support me, the hospital that support me, everybody involved in the healthcare systems, the doctors that even try or ask, hey, and the ones who did, ostracized out of the mainstream media. If this is not a complot, if this is not what you call a conspiracy, what else it can be? This is and has all the aspects of a conspiracy. Not theory, but a conspiracy itself. This is a conspiracy fact. I repeat, eighthly, the experiment should be conducted only by scientifically qualified persons. The highest degree of skill and care should be required through all stages of the experiment of those who conduct or engage in the experiment. It never happened. It never happened. How many doctors can I cite here? Check on my programs. Check on my programs on Rumble. Check on my programs on YouTube. You will find out. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and many others. Journalists was shut up. YouTube, the most corrupted, super rich, artificial intelligence influencer in the world, still denies us, the pharmaceuticals, the doctors, and the politicians and healthcare systems, hospitals, directors, and CEOs that now pretend to be innocent. We didn't know. Yeah, right. Ninthly, during the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible. If you don't get vaccinated, you will lose your job. You will contaminate and kill everybody else. We know that's a lie. We know that 88% of people that have the COVID-19 nowadays, and that this is for a year or more now, are not going to spread the disease. And even if they spread the disease, people are, by natural immunity, 87 to 88% protected by them. Way higher than the so-called vaccination program that produced billions and billions of dollars for pharmaceuticals. During the course, I repeat ninthly, during the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to bring the experiment to an end if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible. They close businesses, school kids, 4 years old, beginning the scholar curriculum, were banned if they don't use or were not vaccinated. And you can still hear in Australia, New Zealand, United States, in England, here in Canada, people saying that you have to vaccinate and to vaccinate your kids. You have just watched the program when these people, mediocre journalism has been exposed, the lies of the beast has been exposed, interviewing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Tenth, during the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage if he has probable cause to believe, in the exercise of the good faith, superior skill, and careful judgment required of him, that a continuation of the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death to the experimental subject. I repeat, 10th. During the course of the experiment, the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment at any stage if he has probable cause to believe, in the exercise of the good faith, superior skill, and careful judgment required of him, that a continuation of the experiment is likely to result in injury, disability, or death to the experimental subject. All these assholes believe that we're stupid, and that's stupid. That now that we see that more than 7 million people died for an unjustified reason, in this case a pandemic that was declared as an emergency act, for countries to stop believing and being themselves in order to paralyze the economy and everything. That is an experiment not for the good of people. It violates all the 10 articles of the Nuremberg Code of 1947. If you still believe that prime minister, presidents, healthcare systems, deans of education in the hospitals, directors of hospitals, I correct here, deans of education in the medical universities, and not only medical, but ethics, aesthetics, and whatever.
My name is Julie Panesi, and this message is about mandatory vaccinations. I am a professor of ethics at Huron College at the University of Western Ontario. It's one of the largest universities in Canada. Today, I'm going to teach you a short lesson on the universally accepted ethics of coercing people into medical procedures. I'll be the example. My employer has just mandated that I must get a vaccine for COVID-19. If I want to keep working at my job as a professor, I have to take this vaccine. Here's my conundrum. My school employs me to be an authority on the subject of ethics. I hold a PhD in ethics and ancient philosophy. And I'm here to tell you it's ethically wrong to coerce someone to take a vaccine. If it happens to you, you don't have to do it. If you don't want a COVID vaccine, don't take one. End of discussion. It's your own business. But that is not the approach of the University of Western Ontario, which has suddenly required that I be vaccinated immediately or not report for work. So with the school year beginning in a few days, I am facing imminent dismissal after 20 years on the job because I will not submit to having an experimental vaccine injected into my body. I've had plenty of vaccines in my life, but I've never been forced to take one. It's always been my choice. I don't work in a high-risk environment. I'm not a doctor in an emergency room. I'm a teacher. I'm a university professor. My job is to teach students how to think critically, to ask questions that might expose a false argument. Questions like, says who? Who is the authority giving this order? Should I trust them with control over my body? As a professor, I don't have to watch the news to find out if the COVID vaccines are safe. I read medical journals, and I consult my colleagues who are professors of science and medicine. I've learned from doctors that there are serious questions about how safe these vaccines really are. There are questions about how well they work. Nobody's promising that I won't get COVID or transmit COVID if I get the vaccine. But ultimately, none of that matters to me because I'm a professor of ethics and I'm a Canadian. I'm entitled to make choices about what does and does not enter my body, regardless of my reasons. If I'm allowed back into my university, it's my job to teach my students that this is wrong. I'm hired to teach them that it is ethically wrong to impose an experimental medical procedure as a condition of employment. This is my first and potentially my last lesson of the year. Ethics 101. In the spirit of Socrates, who was executed for asking questions, this lesson will consist of only one question. The answer is multiple choice. Please listen carefully. When a person has done the same job to the satisfaction of her employer for 20 years, is it right or is it wrong to suddenly demand that they submit to an unnecessary medical procedure in order to keep their job? In this case, the procedure is an injection of a substance that has not been fully tested for safety. It has not yet been shown to be effective. It is designed to prevent an illness that poses little threat to the employee. The employee is not allowed to ask questions. She may only submit to the procedure or be fired. To my first-year students, is this right or is this wrong? I already know the answer.
That was amazing, Julie.
Sorry. Sorry.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming to this press conference after we held yesterday in the European Parliament in Brussels, the third edition of the International COVID Summit. We had tens of doctors, of experts, of researchers, truly professionals who were analyzing and dealing with the coronavirus for many years, and who presented us yesterday their findings and conclusions after the pandemic that we witnessed in the past 3 years. We have here some of the doctors that presented their findings yesterday. I would like to give the floor now to Dr. Malone to share with us some of the conclusions of yesterday's event. Doctor.
Thank you very much. I don't have any prepared remarks. I would like to acknowledge the courageous MPs that have enabled this opportunity and thank them on behalf of the International COVID Summit Group. This is our third International COVID Summit meeting. First one was in Rome in the Senate by invitation. The second one was in Marseille and Massy in France. And now it's been our great pleasure to be able to share our observations and conclusions here in Belgium. I would like to, in particular, emphasize one of the key findings that ran all the way through the presentations, which is that, in fact, there are people who are vaccine injured. This is something that has been suppressed by all channels of, forgive me, corporate media and governments, that there are these individuals who are in fact vaccine damaged, and they have not been allowed to speak. They have had their experiences suppressed. They have been demeaned. They have been gaslit, and they are damaged. And they are damaged in large part consequent to the rush of this product without adequate testing. This was also very well demonstrated during the meeting yesterday, that the regulatory affairs rules and regulations that have guided the European medicines agencies and the FDA and agencies all over the world have been very actively bypassed, and unfortunately there have been consequences. That what we learn is that the wisdom of having these norms and practices to ensure the safety and effectiveness of products before they're deployed into humans have good reason to be used. That they do provide benefit to the population and to humanity by ensuring that the activities of the pharmaceutical industry, whether well-intentioned or otherwise, are properly controlled to ensure the safety and effectiveness of the products in the population. And I now ask for Europe and the European Parliament to please consider that these individuals who have been subjected to so much, they've not only been damaged by the mandated products and the vaccine passport requirements, etc., in order to just engage in their daily activities, to be employed, etc., or in lieu of not being vaccinated, they've lost their jobs, they've lost their livelihoods. I strongly encourage that we acknowledge these individuals, we work together, and that the European Union might provide leadership in helping to discover and identify potential treatments and therapies so that they can be made whole and that they be compensated for the damages that they've incurred as a consequence of the policies that have been implemented throughout the EU, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and across the world. So that's my plea. The conference was, in my opinion, a great success. Again, in large part thanks to the willingness of the MPs who have been so courageous in enabling this meeting, and it truly covered a comprehensive scientific scope. We had a clear demonstration that the European Parliament and the European Union was warned that if there was allowance for patenting of genetically modified organisms and allowance for gain-of-function research, there might well be consequences. And unfortunately, we have seen these consequences now over the last 3 years. We also learned of the damages that have been associated not just with the virus itself, which the evidence indicates was in fact not of natural origin, but also from many of the interventions, and in particular the public public policies having to do with lockdowns, the deleterious effects of mask mandates on children, all the way through the legal implications and looking forward to the international health regulations that are being so actively promoted under the logic that the World Health Organization, which in our opinion, I think most of my colleagues would agree, has been an abysmal failure in managing this outbreak, is now asking for more capital, more power, more control, and more authority, and to really breach the sovereignty of individuals throughout the European Union and the United States and the rest of the world. And I strongly suggest, as do my colleagues that presented on this topic, that the members of the European Parliament closely scrutinize the proposed international health regulations, much as the African nations did when they came up for debate previously, and take a wary, skeptical, experienced eye, remembering that even good intentions will often go awry, and policies and procedures which seem logical can at times be used for other purposes. So I thank you for your time, for the opportunity to speak here, and I hope you will take back to your constituencies the message that the vaccine damaged do exist and they need to be cared for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malone. Christine?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for being here. I would just like to reflect on yesterday's conference, and I really have to say I thank each and every one of the presenters, of the scientists, of the doctors, to appear in front of us and to give their arguments, present the data, present the facts, because in the end we were pretty much right about everything. Just thinking back when we started 2 years ago, I didn't know any one of these wonderful people, how far we have come. We have grown into a family. It's a family of dissenting voices all around the globe, and I'm particularly grateful that I have been made a member of this family that I'm very proud of, and like I said, wonderful people, and we will continue to be the dissenting voice, and we will do whatever it takes to bring down the globalitarian elites. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christine. Ivan?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I am very happy and proud that we managed to organize the third International COVID Summit. We have heard some wonderful science, research and testimonies yesterday, and it is amazing to have it all in one place. I must say that there is political will in Europe, there is political will in this parliament and also in national parliaments that wants to make things right and that wants to make great standards for the future. We will send the conclusions, each of every professor, doctor, to the EMA agency, to the Commission, to our COVID committee, and we will demand that they take these findings into account. If they refuse to do that, we will hammer them with the scientific data. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as Dr. Malone mentioned, and my colleagues, for us in the European Parliament, we took the lead, I would say, in October of 2021 when my colleagues here to, first of all, raise concerns. We were not aware initially about the gravity and the complexity of the issue, but I'm glad that after our fight here, we got to this point where we were able to bring so many experts and researchers, professors and doctors to share their findings with us. And I would like to give the floor now to my colleague, Mr. Kolakusic from Croatia.
Thank you. I would like shortly to wear a people from upcoming danger for humanity. The World Health Organization wants all countries to sign an agreement on handing over the authority to declare a pandemic, procure vaccine and drugs. It would be healthier and safer for humanity to sign agreement with the Colombian drug cartel. They know all about the drugs for sure. During the COVID pandemic, World Health Organization only told lies about all things. It should be declared a terroristic organization. And their lives and health of billions of people, it putting in their hands, it's extremely danger. They lie that is a new and unknown virus, that is possible to make an effective vaccine, that the vaccine is 82% effective, that it protects against serious illness and deaths, that all, of course, were foolish and lies. Today, World Health Organization is more dangerous organization for humanity than World Economic Forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And some asked us why it's us from Eastern Europe, the one who took the lead, I would say, in exposing and fighting the abuses that happened during the pandemic. And I answered them and I said, the reason why we did it, and we have two MEPs from Croatia, I'm from Romania, Christine was born in East Germany, is because we are, I would say, young enough to remember how it was to live in a totalitarian regime, in a communist system. And because we've been there, lived that, it's our duty right now to tell the world that we have to fight for freedom, we have to fight for liberty, and nevertheless we have to fight for truth. And what we've done yesterday here is to allow every expert, every doctor, every professor to present to us and to the world the findings after their professional research, I would say. And it's important for us as MEPs and as elected officials, regardless of the office that we are holding, to listen to real experts. Because unfortunately for all these years, we heard more from bureaucrats, we heard more from NGOs who do not have any expertise in this field, but we barely heard anything from real experts, like Dr. Malone and all the others who presented their findings to us yesterday. And since I mentioned Eastern Europe, I'm here with my friend from Romania, George Simeon. He's a member of the Romanian Parliament, and we agreed yesterday to host the 4th edition of the International COVID Summit in the Romanian Parliament in Bucharest in the fall of 2024. Thank you, of 2023, sorry. Yes. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here. If there are any questions from the media, we will happily answer them. No? Thank you so much. Yes. Press the button, please.
This one?
Yes, and
sorry.
If you address the question to any of us.
I would love to address my question to you, Christian Terres. How will you prevent the World Health Organization, how will you prevent the EU to take part and the national states to take part in the new treaty from the World Health Organization? Thank you.
First of all, that treaty will have to be ratified by these guys in the national parliaments. So it will be very important for you in every EU member state to make sure that you call on your elected officials in your national parliament to make sure that they will not ratify that treaty. And then the treaty will come to us in the European Parliament, to deal with it here. But the fight starts at the national level, which is why I'm calling on all of you to be involved at the national level. Make sure you petition your elected officials in the national parliament to stop this before it's becoming a recognized treaty in the international law. Any other questions?
Yes. Yes. I'm sure you're aware of also the international health regulation that can go much faster than, signing a new treaty, while these amendments just need to be changed and adopted by a few without even telling, the whole world some sort of similar coup, perhaps not to the same extent, but is happening. So is there also some attention on this matter? Because this is next month also.
Yes, we had a conference in the European Parliament in Strasbourg, I think it was last week, if I'm not mistaken, or 2 weeks ago, with one of our colleagues, Virginie Joron, from France, who was able to bring together a lot of legal experts from different EU countries who told us about this problem. The challenge here is to raise awareness about what is prepared to all of us, but I'm restating what I earlier said. It's important for you to get in touch with these guys at the national level, because that's where every treaty has to be ratified. Our national parliaments will have to pass a law in order to ratify this treaty or convention. That's how things are done. So we do everything we can here. We want to give a platform, the opportunity. I mean, what was done yesterday with the International COVID Summit it was unseen in this building in years. But the fight starts at the national level, because at the end of the day, we are all sovereign nations, and we have to defend our sovereignty at and from the national level, which is why I'm restating, get in touch with the elected officials in the national parliaments and make sure you raise awareness about this problem. Thank you. Yes.
Sorry. It's very important who you send in your national parliaments. In Romania, we are the second largest party right now, but with only 10% representatives in the parliament, we managed to stop the Green Pass. In Romania, lower than 40% vaccinated COVID-19 vaccines happened. So it's important to find political parties that fight against these plans and send them to the national parliaments and to the European Parliament after May 2024. If we don't do this, they will manage to make similar coups. Thank you. And thanks the kind doctors for their participant, and we are waiting you in Bucharest. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hello, my name is Marian, and first of all, I want to express my gratitude for these people in front of us here, for their pristine work that they brought to us, for us to understand the way of this SARS-CoV virus. Second, I will be very happy to see you again in Bucharest on the next summit, COVID Summit, International COVID Summit. And one of my questions is, what will be next now? What is coming next? We know about the COVID, we know about the SARS. You did, like I said, a pristine work showing us and how it works and how it has been released to the world and so on. What is the next step? Are we fighting against the virus itself or against the people that released it? Or I don't know how to. I hope you understand what I mean. What is the next step?
I would like to answer that. You are indeed right. COVID was just, like I said yesterday, a test balloon, and the lessons they learned from this, namely how did they fail and where did they fail to get the people to just do what they were told to, comply, and they will take this to the next level. So we're talking, of course, about digital ID. It's in preparation. We're already talking about this. The Parliament circumvented itself pretty much by taking with a large majority a vote to not even involve Parliament. It goes directly behind closed doors to negotiate the digital ID. The next thing we will be seeing is, of course, CBCD, the digital state currency. That will be the ultimate blow to depriving us of all of our freedom and privacy. And and of course these 15-minute ghettos that I already talked about yesterday. These are the next steps, and once again, I want to make it clear, we're not talking about some future projects 40, 50 years down the line. We are talking about as in right now that they're working on. And once again, we need the people on our side on this to fight this, to raise awareness, and to let their government, especially the national governments, know they will not deal with that and they will not accept this. That's what we need the people for. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Herman Kelly. I'm Director of Communications for Mr. Therese. I'd like to ask Dr. Byram Bridle to give us his thoughts on the conference yesterday, please, and we'll conclude with that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Dr. Byram Bridle. I'm a viral immunologist at a university in Canada.
And first, I just want to address the question that was just asked. So, from a scientific perspective, what I can tell you is after this conference, from my experience of the past 2 years, inevitably, everybody who spoke yesterday will be accused of having disseminated misinformation. I wanted to point out that what I saw yesterday was an awful lot of primary data presented. And when people are accusing us of disseminating misinformation, they never address the primary data that we have presented, nor do they provide primary data to demonstrate that what we have said is incorrect. So in terms of the future, when it comes to science, misinformation is something that we have to be very concerned about. And this, we need the press to help scientists around the world and physicians around the world in this area, because if you aren't aware, there's talks in pretty much every country around the world about the potential to criminalize misinformation, fine scientists and physicians, fire scientists and physicians if they provide misinformation. This has to be of concern to the media, because you have to start asking yourselves, if that's the case, who are going to be the arbiters of truth if it's not going to be scientists who provide primary data? So that's a key thing you have to watch out for. The other thing is if you are not aware, the mRNA vaccines that were rolled out over the past couple of years, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The same companies are developing mRNA vaccines for other diseases, and you might not be aware there is an enormous number of mRNA vaccines being developed for veterinary use. And that in of itself is also a potential concern to human health. So for example, we know that the mRNA vaccines can get into human breast milk. And therefore we have infants who are consuming undefined doses of these mRNA vaccines. These were never approved for that route of administration, nor to be administered to infants. And yet we now know that is happening. And if it could get into human breast milk, who's to say that they couldn't get into the milk, meat, and eggs that we consume? So I'm telling you, based on what I saw yesterday, there needs to be an immediate moratorium on mRNA vaccine technology until the very many legitimate scientific questions that have come up about this technology over the last 2 years can be definitively answered. And I'd just like to end with this. The thing I most appreciated about my experience yesterday was the fact that these MEPs here, these are heroes to me, and you should not only be proud of them here in Europe, but these are political leaders around the world, I can tell you. So the country that I come from does not allow open discussion about the science underpinning COVID-19, but what was allowed yesterday was uncensored, open, and honest discussion of the hard, objective data underpinning COVID-19 policies, and I would like to thank these MEPs for allowing us to do that.
Thank you.
So this is very important. The doctor has the right, unless the doctor is acting unlawfully or against the Hippocratic Oath, which is to cause no harm. We also analyzed the cause no harm issues in one of my programs. I don't mind doing it again. Okay, I repeat. For a great many Canadians following these proceedings, it must surely appear self-evident that such suggestions should not be used as grounds for suspension, investigation, or punishment of any doctor. Indeed, questionable actions by CPSO. Indeed, it seems highly questionable whether the CPSO panel has acted in good faith during the hearing. To wit, the CPSO hearing panel refused even to address Drs. Lucky, Phillips, and Trowsey's key submissions that the CPSO, and I quote, Registrar Dr. Nancy Whitmore did not have reasonable and probable ground to order their investigations, and that the college failed to establish that they had violated a standard of practice, unquote. Quite frankly, to ignore these submissions has all the earmarks of hubristic folly, appearing contrary to the principles of fundamental justice and the spirit of law in Canada. Dr. Patrick Phillips has expressed the matter succinctly, and I quote, In a free and democratic society, citizens are protected from laws that are so broad you can't know if you're violating them beforehand, unquote. Discussions of legal proceedings rarely make for good reading. The plodding pace of legal arguments and the barrier posed by technical vocabulary inevitably get in the way of visceral understanding That's why it's absolutely essential that, in closing, we return to the fundamental issues. Doctors Crystal Lukiv, Patrick Phillips, and Mark Trosey have lost their licenses, their careers are under threat, and their lives are being marred by the unpleasant necessity of enormously costly ongoing legal fees. College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, unquote, and the subsequent creation of a new college, quote, one with leaders who respect their rule of law, unquote, and whose power is, I quote, limited to prosecutions of offenses that are in line with the Charter and protect the rights of all, unquote. I don't know what you think about this, but I totally agree with this 100%. What we're seeing here is an abuse of power. What we here seeing is the breaking of all and each of the articles of the Nuremberg Code. What we see here is nothing but corruption that goes down from the prime ministers and presidents of all around the world to the healthcare systems, to the doctors, to the universities. I made a program before speaking about, the absence of scientific-based decisions and curriculums for universities. It's all being bought off. And as I have mentioned 8 years ago, this year we have 8 years since this program began, the power of brute capital is corrupting everything and every institution, and the pandemic has reiterated, but not only that, has proven, in fact, how corrupted the system has become. You can just check out what the FBI is doing in the United States and how the whistleblowers are coming to shine on the Congress of the United States, if not the most corrupt country, Congress in the world, that passes laws and bylaws in foreign policy and domestic policy. Okay, that's another issue that we have to talk about. Let's get back to the Nuremberg Code and how the presidents and prime ministers, healthcare departments of all nations mainly, have corrupted their institutions so bad that now it's common practice to be corrupted and to be a doctor without boundaries regarding what is ethical and what is unethical. Like Dr. Mengele and those others, they are just acting freely against their own patients, and that is unacceptable. Okay, guys, what I'm trying to say here, and I finish with this, is how stupid do you think these people that are in charge of our world think we are? They don't think. They're pretty sure we are that dumb. That as long as you have money in your bank and you abide by the rules of law and how is it that Joe Biden called it nowadays? The world rules, commandments, or whatever. I don't even want to say it because it's nothing. It's a different name for world order or whatever. The point is, our democracy is going down. I say it again, democracy has never existed, but yeah, well, let's live by illusions. Who is in charge of this? Who is behind it? How many centuries have we been here as humans playing the fool? It is time to react today and take over, because Canada, in this case, is the last country that we can save, even though it's best pals with America. Sweden, Finland, they used to be neutral because another force, which is the war against Russia. Listen, guys, if you don't open your eyes, your understanding, and your duty as Christian or whatever religion you are, believe in your God or not, I stopped believing in those religions whatsoever firmly. I go to confession just because my mother said so. And she wants me to go to confession. But believe you me, when I hear the Catholic Church saying that Russia is the bitch and we have to go to war against Russia and kill 11 time zones of that big country, just because they are Russians and they're threatening our way of life, that's a lie. They say the same about Iraq, Libya. No, what they wanted was liberty and freedom. They were dictatorships. Yes, they were dictatorships. But if you read history, if you were a little bit educated, like I am, and I'm not an educated person, I think I am just a welder, I'm a tradesman. And I understand these things. How come lawyers, architects, career politicians don't get it? It's because they're benefiting for the system that is destroying us, the country, and the world. And if you don't understand that, I can excuse the, tradesmen, people that don't have time to educate themselves, poor enough to go to war, with the promise of killing enough people to come back home, and all that stuff, which is also a lie. And you can see George Bush painting and having a wonderful time, and you can see Hillary Clinton speaking with Canadian trader Prime Minister and her deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. Oh my God, man. I can't take this fast. Listen, I come from a third world country. I was born there, even though my ancestry is Dutch, Hollander. The point is, I have never seen so much corruption in my lifetime as I have seen it, not even in my country where I come from. What I'm talking about is the United States, 27 countries in Europe, by the guidance of Israel and the United States, are giving up their rights for these two countries that are doing whatever they please since the Second World War and before, of course. You can call it Zionism, you can call it conspiracy. Well, it is a conspiracy, and guess who's winning? It is not the democratic countries, because there's no democracy, there's only plutocracy. And if you take a look to the results of the so-called democracy all around the world, guided by Israel, the United States, and the UK, and the 27 countries around the world, they are failures. Poverty and misery. Or am I inventing this up? Am I making this up? Haven't you seen the migration of Central and South America going to Europe? No, that's Soros. No! It might be, sure. Prove it to me. But in the meantime, it's American foreign policy for more than 100 years. Noam Chomsky said it, even though I don't trust him any longer after his comments on the pandemic. And why is it that these people always, their skin, when you peel it up, are against you? I'm not surprised whatsoever. I'm just disappointed that the Canadian people don't understand that we people from the third world countries, as long as we are honest, because there's corrupt people in the third world countries too that are for the benefits they receive. Take a look from Colombia right now, for example, the biggest producer of cocaine in the world, and I finish with this, where the judicial system, there's no separation of powers. The separation of powers have become only the Attorney General. The Attorney General has everything to say against the president, and there's nobody to control him. You know how many people they kill under his knowledge? And fiscal attorney general, not general, but some attorney, Hernandez, 4,000 people in the last 2 years have been killed. They knew about it and they didn't say anything. So the Gulf clan can kill them all. Okay, this is a third world country that you might say here in Canada, they're in Europe, Finland, 27 Europe countries, whatever, United States. That's a third world country. Well, there's a banana republic here. You are living a banana republic politic revolution here in your country, and you don't even see it because you don't hear people that have already lived this kind of situation, and you don't want to hear me. If you like what you just hear in this program and what you saw in this program, support the channel. Give it a like, subscribe, share this information, and support the channel on the World's Whale Project /Patreon or Patreon / the World's Whale Project. Yeah, any support is welcome. For us, for the country, for the world. Hope to see you next time in the next edition of React Today as part of the World's Whale Project initiative. Au revoir. Bye-bye. Hasta pronto.